All right, that's the relaxing time on. Over now, you've got to do some work. Sorry about that. We asked our 5 panellists, we're still waiting for Judith, she's just popped outside. We asked our 5 panellists to give us their top 5 issues or questions. And we've also been circulating the issues and questions around the career system, problems with the careers environment, careers construct, and these were the top 5 that consistently came up in people's lists. Bridging the gap between education and employment, better outcome for Māori and Pacifica, rebuilding a vibrant Christchurch, joining the dots, in other words making that wheel contiguous, making sure that job seekers are linked to industry needs, and a well-qualified workforce. So these are the 5 questions that we would like to put firstly to our panellists, and I'm going to ask each of our panellists to pick one, or the top one for them, or they can comment on more than one. And now I want to turn our attention to, okay, what are we going to do about it? We've talked enough about the problems, I think. We've got to start now talking about the actions. So I start at the far end with Tina. Would you like to give us your thoughts around your key question or questions and what we can do?
And what we can do, well that's, I think hopefully the floor will be able to help us on the what we can do part about that. Okay, I'm going to take a stab and go for the Māori and Pacifica. And what's the rest of that question?
Better outcome for Māori and Pacifica youth.
Better outcomes for Māori and Pacifica youth. You know, that has to happen. We were just talking in the break before around the demographics that are going to appear. And as part of our keynote speaker's speech, he kind of mentioned that, and I think the data, 40% of our population will be supporting 60% in the not too far distant future. And if we look at the demographics of Māori and Pacifica and the numbers that they're going to make up of our working population, we have to make the change occur now. And if we don't, we're going to see some real difficulties in our economy and our education system and just our way of life, which we're so used to doing at the moment. Making the difference for them, you know, we talk about that in isolation, and I think a key thing to note is also our Māori and Pacifica people marry non-Māori and Pacifica as well, so it's going to become all of our problems in a very short time if we don't start addressing these key components. How we fix it? We've got to change our ways of engaging. That's not a new message. Everyone's spoken about that for a long time. We just haven't found the right method of engaging and changing the way that we try and get our young people and our second stage learners into a better environment for learning and being more skilled in the workforce. Anything else there, Graham? You know, I think that's a good point to start opening the floor for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions you want to comment on?
They are all relevant, and to look at them all in isolation would be wrong because they all, you know, it crosses all of the dynamics for all of us. Joining the dots also falls into the Christchurch workforce and building the new Christchurch. Bridging the gaps, we don't look at that in isolation either because that's all the kids now that are in those areas that need to still find pathways and passions around how they're going to now move into their careers and what growing up means for them. And a well-qualified workforce, well that's our ultimate game. You know, that's making sure that when we're employers, we are satisfied that the people we have on decks are getting the most out of their choices that they've made. As employers, we want to make sure that we are the ones that are being serviced by the people that we're engaging to deliver services for us. So I don't think we can look at any one of those in isolation.
Thank you. Simon, you want to give your top one or top two?
Yeah, unsurprisingly, I think I'll take Christchurch. I want to take you back a wee bit to about 18 months ago. We started writing the economic development strategy for Christchurch, and at that point, we had some fairly high level or fairly ballsy growth aspirations for the city. I guess it's fair to say. And then in September we had the first of what was 3 catastrophic earthquakes that hit the city. And that's kind of changed the picture for us down south for a wee while. Those growth aspirations, I don't think have gone away. During the development of that strategy, we identified 4 key areas that we figured would be, over the next 10 years, real drivers of growth. And that's the ag sector, the specialised manufacturing sector, the business services sector, and the ICT sector. Now, when we've reviewed those after the earthquake, there's been they're still significant sectors and they're still significantly growing. There are still skill shortages across those sectors, and it's imperative that we get young people lined up into those sectors. We have an emerging sector now, construction, and we have somewhere in the order of 17,000 houses to rebuild, 160,000 properties to fix, probably somewhere in the region of $3 billion of infrastructure to repair, and an unknown amount of commercial real estate to fix up and get functional again. So Christchurch as a region, Canterbury as a region has got huge growth potential, and engaging young people into those key growth sectors and the construction sector is going to be critical to the long-term success, but also reconnecting our existing workforce is hugely important. One of the points I would make is, and it was made this morning by Bernard, that the qualification levels within the city aren't necessarily married up and going to allow us to achieve that level of growth as we go forward. We have 57% of our working age population has a level 3 qualification or lower. The growth sectors are demanding increasingly higher level skills, levels 5, 6 degrees and higher. So we need to somehow get that message to young people as well that for the sectors that are going to drive the growth in our city, they need to get very well qualified to take up the opportunities that are going to be abundant in the city as we go forward.
Thank you, Tom. There's a couple of other points I think we can make about the Christchurch situation at the moment. We actually have a real opportunity in this tragedy that's occurred in Christchurch to think differently. We actually have a clean sheet of canvas because so many of the stakeholders and the bits of the system that existed prior to the earthquakes have broken and changed people's attitudes so that we can actually think completely outside the box. It's a real neat environment to be able to establish a new career system, for example. The other strength of this tragedy for New Zealand is that it's getting Canterbury to think regionally, and we're seeing exactly the same sort of feedback coming from Auckland, from Bay of Plenty and from the Hawke's Bay. They're starting to think regionally about their economic growth. And that's a really manageable size for a career system to start to influence a region by keeping young people in quality employment in the region is a great initiative. Jeremy, do you want to?
Yeah, I do want to. I think what we need is a set of tools to help us think about how we're going to solve these problems, because they're complex problems and we keep restating them. And I think we need some conceptual frameworks that will actually help us all in our different places where we work tackle them. And there's a set of approaches and things that I have started to do in the industry training sector, and I think they apply as much to the careers system and in fact to the world of work, and in fact to the challenges that Bernard just talked about for New Zealand. The first thing is, I think it's really critical we have a clear vision, we have a clear direction, some concepts to aggregate around. There's a lot of sense of confusion and uncertainty of what do we do, where do we go, and you know, whether the four that Simon have talked about are right or not, I don't care. At some point I just want to grab something and aggregate around them. Because if we don't aggregate around them, one of the problems that small economies at the edge of the world like New Zealand have is that we're very thin. And we never have depth. So we have to create some artificial depth by having a theme. I quite like doing this theme. I think we need a theme for New Zealand. And I think you need a theme for the career system. I think you need something that people will get passionate about and they'll go, yep, right, that's my direction. Now, that's one of the things that we've tried to do in that area through the stuff that you've heard about from the Minister in the vocational pathways work is try to clear away some of the confusion about what is the destination. We're not trying to say to everybody, you go to work in that job or that job, but here are 5 broad sectors that you can think about the economy that you might end up working in. And for those people, particularly those parents and those teachers who've never worked in any of those areas, we have to start giving them some tools to actually be able to talk to young people about all the range of options. And so the 5 sectors that the Minister talked about, building and infrastructure, manufacturing and technology, services, government and community, and the primary and agricultural sector, those are big enough concepts that people can start to think, okay, I understand that, and now I can start to drill down. So that's a way. How do you join the dots? You join the dots by understanding what the connections are. You can't understand the connections if there are 300 of them, but if there are 5, and which can then be unpacked a little bit more further down, you've actually got some tools that will work. I think there are some other things that we need to do. We radically need to shift value away from volume. And again, that's a challenge that the whole education system has suffered from. We went through a massive volume binge. It's a little bit like the debt binge. And it's been about more, and not necessarily about whether or not people are actually getting qualifications that are actually useful to get them jobs that are rewarding, that actually are skills that are useful. So a radical shift from volume to value. Another radical shift is away from complexity and proprietary approaches, my qualification, my approach, my thing, to a more simple but also more flexible approach. And again, we're not starting from a standing start here. The targeted review of qualifications is challenging and difficult, but I think it is part of the solution here, that actually we're getting everybody to have to come together and work out what they're all trying to achieve. And the last thing is moving to a partnering rather than a parochial model. I mean, you don't get people to collaborate just by saying let's collaborate. And one of the key solutions, I think, there is for people to work out what their intermediate customer offering is. What can I offer the person next to me, who's I've traditionally seen as my enemy or my competitor? What services do they need? There's been a little bit of stoush in the media between Brick's organisation and one of my members, and frankly, we need to get over that crap. We need to, the plumbing ITO and the plumbing industry need to sit down with Rick and the Polytechs and work out how do we provide an end-to-end solution so that the selection of the kids going into those pre-trade programs are right, and that when they come out, there's actually a transition program for them to go into an apprenticeship. That is the only solution that's going to work. So that's my answer. It's 4 concepts, and I think that with that level of concept, we can actually make some progress.
Thank you, Jeremy. One of the things I think I'd like to reinforce is the answers are already out there. The solutions already exist, and they exist in this room. And we're not talking about rocket science here. It's about making what we already know work better, and the solution is right in front of us. David.
Kia ora, everybody. First thing I'm going to do is go home and apologise to my children after Bernard's. I might go shopping first, though. Just 3 points I want to make on the bridging the gap between education and employment. The first is, and I was really heartened to hear Antoli this morning talk about a 5-pronged pathway, vocational pathways. That's really encouraging. But I suppose I just want to acknowledge also that there's a level below that as well, which includes a whole lot of things, including careers, but also connection support, transitional support as young people are making their decisions, plans, life plans, training courses, preparation for employment is really, really important, and courses that are designed with input from employers, not just by academics, is really important as well, like courses that actually have real-time results that young people can focus on and raise their aspirations towards. And obviously workplace literacy and life skills and all these other things are important too. The second thing I think we as a society need to take on board is, I guess young people can drive a truck through insincerity, and I think we've got to be careful about what message we want to send to young people. And I'll just give you two quick examples in my own experience. For example, around non-academic pathways into employment. My own example, I'm a mechanic by trade, very proud of that, and when I served a 4-year apprenticeship, I was living away from home and I was really struggling because I'm not a very academic person. And when I qualified, the only thing that happened to me was a certificate arrived in the mail that had been scrunched up by the postal service. My older brother, who was much cleverer and ducks at the school, he did a 1 year less and a teaching degree and got a week's march down Queen Street and free booze and burned a couch and all the other things these fellas do. And I guess you know, the comparison that a lot of tradespeople make and people who are going to be attracted to non-academic pathways have to see that society values their achievement as much as and I just read a report recently from Harvard that said something like of the 47 million jobs being created in the next 7 years, less than a third require a bachelor's degree, and yet we're churning out bachelors by the armload. So you know that, and the second, yes, and the debt attached to it. And the second thing was around debt. Thanks, Jeremy. Was you know, one of the things that Bernard mentioned in his report was around the huge amount of debt relating to interest-free loans. Now again, that's relating only to an academic career. The mechanic has to borrow money to buy their tools and buy their equipment and fund their apprenticeship fees, not interest-free. So again, what message are we sending people who choose alternative pathways? A person borrows money to get a truck licence to be a truck driver, has to go through the normal channels. There's no free lunch, thank you. The third thing I think is really important is employers, I think, need to understand what motivates young people and what encourages them into their employment pathway. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. Flexible opportunities for young people to give them time at their own pace to fall in love with those careers is really, really important. I had a situation just recently where I spoke to a young man who was very grumpy, and he'd gone to a garage, not in my town, but a garage to look for an after-school job, because when youngsters get to that age, all they're motivated by is money to buy a cell phone and add to the more debt. And he'd gone along to the employer, and the employer said, well, I'll give you an after-school job, 3:30 till 5, and here's the money, and fantastic. And the young fella turned the job down, and the employer told everybody that this generation is too lazy, they don't work, they don't respect anything. And the boy explained to me, he said, well, actually, I take piano on a Tuesday and I have rugby training on a Thursday. And he said, I just couldn't commit to the 5 days, and the employer wouldn't negotiate back from that. And because, again, put yourself into his shoes, at that point he was debating whether he was going to be a concert pianist or an All Black or a mechanic. An employer was asking him to throw two of those possibilities away on the off chance of a scummy old after-school job that might only last 6 weeks. You know, so again, that sort of thing has to, and also understanding what motivates young people to aspire to career choices. I mean, you've got two aspects of that. You've got the push of education, and you've got the push of society in general that young people should be aspire to great things. But you've also got the pull of opportunity, and that's something we're not investigating closely enough. What will raise the young person's desire to stay at school longer and get their level 2 and greater is the pull of opportunity. And I think as industry we need to really paint that picture in language that young people understand what the pull is that got us into the opportunities that we as adults are benefiting from right now. Language is really important. I had a group of young people chat to me recently, and it was really interesting because we went through a checklist of the terminology. And for example, work, the phrase work frightened most young kids away because it sounded hard, it sounded like manual labour. Well, it is, but in their minds that was something that should be shied away from. And the terminology job was something like an after-school chore. It was like something demeaning. It's something they did to earn pocket money, and they felt that the word job wasn't enough of an attraction for them to consider that broadly. A career sounded like somebody who left school at 16 and worked in the post office and retired at 65, and to them it was like a prison sentence, so it's quite interesting. Employment was the one word that they really gravitated towards, and when I asked why, they said because you can go from an employee to an employer by changing one letter, and that sounded pretty easy. So that was quite interesting. I'll leave you with all of that. Cheers.
Thank you, Dave.
Judith.
Well, since no one else has followed the instructions, I'm not going to either. Nothing like hijacking the agenda. I'm going to kind of summarise what I think I've heard this morning. And we've talked quite a lot about what we think's wrong, and we've talked quite a lot about how we can fix it, and we've had a little bit of talk about who's going to do it, who's going to do the fixing. So I just wanted to touch on those, and then you that was in place to Hilda, which was, what's another word for career. So that whole idea about what's wrong, that, you know, that the number of kids not in employment or education, 19% nationwide, 40% in South Auckland, where I've been working. We've got a big problem out there, and it's all about 35,000 kids that are engaged in Decile 1 and 2 schools, and those schools are all in the same place here in South Auckland. So we can get really puzzled and confused and rush off into a whole lot of stuff in lots of other places, but the place that we need to do it is in South Auckland. Another thing that I think is wrong is the future of work. We don't know enough about it. You know, lots of us have talked about, and Dale just then, that link between what we're telling our kids and what the jobs are. We need to bring those employers back into the camp. Get them to come and be involved in conversations, be involved in what we're doing. Be involved because we're producing people for their market. They need us. That whole idea about how we're going to fix things. And Graham's got his wheel. I think it's more like a web. Can we have a web instead of a wheel? And it's got little curvy bits like a web.
I called it a tangled web.
A tangled web, okay. So colloquially we've been calling it a wheel. Let's go back to the tangled web, because that notion of connectedness is inherent in the web, and I like the webby bit. And I guess it looks to the future. But inherent in the web is the notion of connection, the notion of trust, and the notion of commitment. So all those are really important how questions or how answers. I noticed something here that Bernard said. That whole idea about the well-paid, interesting jobs. So we can have to create them, and we'll create them on the back of the connection and the trust. We go back to what Tina said, we actually have to change a whole lot of stuff. We have to change how we engage with kids, change how we engage with employers, change how we engage with educators. And I've got a few ideas about that too. So that links into who's going to do it. Well, at the end of the day, it's us. We have to do it. These are my future. It's actually our future, and we're going to do it one at a time. So that comes back to the comments that Dale made just before too, is that we can't do the whole, what did you call it, Dale? Something very impressive, I thought. The volume binge. I love that, volume binge. We're not going to do volume binges, damn it. We're going to do value binges. We know... What was Jeremy? Sorry, Jeremy. I wrote Jeremy beside it. So forget the volume, because we're not going to make an iota of difference to those 35,000 kids that need us so desperately. They're not going to be helped by the volume. We need to cut to value, and we need to cut to ourselves and what we can do as individuals and what we can do with our sphere of influence. There's something, I guess, as I've learned, since I've had my 21st birthday, I've been learning that actually, if you can somehow reach groups of people, you have a really, through individuals, you have a really powerful opportunity to change. I mean, we... just as an example, I had a meeting I was involved in last year, a program we're doing. We called it Accelerating Aotearoa's Talent. One at a time, person by person. We started with a group of 100 Pacific kids in Otara, and we had, we kicked off, we believe, an amazing program. We established relationships with each one of those 100 kids. We know all about mum, all about dad. We know if they were born in New Zealand, and we know what their jobs are. We know, whether they identify Tongan, Samoan, Niue Māori, Samoan Māori. We know all about those things about them. We know what they want to be when they grow up. We know what they do in the weekends. We know a whole lot of stuff about them. Then we said, okay guys, we want you to come together on one day, bring mum and dad, bring your little sisters, we've got lots of food. We want you to talk about some of those things. And I had no idea how we were going to pull that day together. But in actual fact, we used what I lovingly call a Pacific Mafia. Everybody used their relationships with the people they knew to talk about what it was we were doing, and it all just came together. Now imagine if we could put the career issue out to our networks, and we could do that all together because we all belong in the web. So that's the challenge at the end of the who's going to do it, us. And then that notion of, now this one definitely was down, how do we replace Graham's career word? And I love that idea, we need to give our kids time to fall in love with careers. I think that's a really important thing to do, falling in love.
Ricky here, Unitec. Look, I guess a couple of things. First of all, who in this room is now doing the job? Who in this room is now doing the job that they trained for? First, go straight after they left school.
One.
And one behind you too.
I think one of the things we need to take into account here is recognising it is about what's the next transition and what are we doing when we talk about the word career, how we're trying to define that. Because everybody will change what they do in their working life through the course of their working life, some way, shape or form. Sometimes that change will be quite closely related to what they start out doing. Sometimes it will be radically different. So I think we need to balance what happens next part of the transition with what are we building into our students, be they from school to tertiary or tertiary into employment or school to employment. What are we building around that will serve them right through their working life? The core attributes, the core values, the resilience, the ability to work with people, those sorts of things have to be part of this mix of work.
Yeah, totally agree, Rick. One of the questions that I constantly get asked when I've been presenting to groups is why I am emphasising that people should make a single decision at the age of 15 to do a single career. And for the life of me, I've tried to use wording that is completely opposite of that. Whenever you talk about making career decisions or having decision-making skills, the perception from those people who aren't in the sector like we are is that we're asking a 15-year-old to make one choice about one job. So we've got a communication problem.
That also ties into that when we were turning out bachelors for bachelors' sake, because kids are too scared to really commit unless they've got direct career paths like medicine or real key outcome stuff. They're too scared to commit to one area, and why would you when there's a whole world of opportunity out there? And yet we kind of then say that they're faffing around and not committing to contributing back to society or economy in that space. So it's a rock and a hard place for these young people and their parents who are trying to guide them.
Yes.
Is it speaking in support of the humble BA?
Yes, speaking to them.
My name is Rachel, and I'm the President of Institute for Education in Auckland. My question to the panel is around the defragmenting the web and looking at the context of Auckland being the centrality of the focus of the engine room of the nation, and what Judy was talking about in terms of the focus is South Auckland, and we have our internal careers consultancy and employment brokerage for our 2,500 students. And when some TEC officials were visiting and speaking to some of these students out in South Auckland, and were asking them about the recession and the impact on them. And these students said, what recession? It's always been like this, but here for us at South Auckland. How are we going to connect better with these families and these communities that are the engine room of our nation?
Thank you, Rachel. Right behind you, Philip. Thank you. And then down the front, that's table 6.
Dale, a question for you, because you seem the most controversial and such to say what you think. Gen Y see us as the problem. Why would they want we've got? They see adults has got no time, no money, and heck, here we are, we've developed a system designed to create more of us. Why would they want us?
Because they want to change the system, basically.
And are we listening? Is actually the question.
We as adults listen in our own way, but it's different to the way young people listen. I mean, what motivates a young person to get into work initially is not is not the thought of making a conscious decision about what career they intend to spend the next X number of years. The first motivation is they need money for various other things. Secondly, they have a vision of a lifestyle that they want to participate in, so the money needs to be able to support that, or the employment opportunity needs to be able to support that. And thirdly, they really have a strong desire, and Bernard touched on it, to be valued, to actually feel that they have a place in the world that will recognise them for what they contribute in. So those are the three things. It takes time for this Generation Y to actually fall in love and wake up one morning and realise they're in a career. Farming is an absolute classic, where farmers will continue to complain about the inability to attract young people into their industry. But they work 70 hours a week, and the busiest time of the year is when it never stops raining and it's cold, and there's no set hours. Now, how attractive is that to a young person? It's not at all. So, there's got to be a real sea change in that industry to actually create entry-level pathways that are competitive with other options that young people can choose. And they've got to look at breaking down that 70 hours into 235 hours for a start, and you know what I mean, like develop ways for young people to have a taste and then dip a toe in and then ease into it, and then as all other things consume their income, such as marriages and mortgages and all these other things, then the reality will be they will be part of that industry. They're a unique group of people, Gen Y. I love them to bits. I've got a 1-year-old now and she's fantastic. And, they're wonderful. I've never met a young person who doesn't want to work. I've never come across one. And, I remember back in 2007, I was down in Wellington having a celebration with the then government around. There was less than 250 people under 25 years old unemployed in New Zealand. So when there are jobs, young people work. The 40,000 that are out of work at the moment are a direct reality around the lack of jobs. And in actual fact, if you take that a step further, is because we are churning out so many graduates now that many of those are ending up underemployed and they're taking jobs. You've got people with degrees flipping burgers taking the jobs that young people without qualifications or further down the ladder would normally have gone into. So, we are creating a bow wave as the so-called baby boomers that we're really proud of. As I say, we don't have a lot to be proud of, to be fair. I suspect that the Generation Y, for all their frailties, are actually going to fix this on our behalf, and we're going to be very grateful to them. It tends to go in cycles, doesn't it, generationally? One builds it up, the other cuts it down, the other builds it up. We just happen to be the cut-down version.
I'm Andrew Clellan from the Institute of Professional Engineers. We've had quite a major program for some years, and this is at level 6 and above, but the word that works for us is career progression. And the progression, we used to talk about career development, professional development. The development word didn't work. We talk about career progression, and what we find for the young people is they want to know what they would be doing, told by another young person, and occasionally by family. Family are okay, but another young person is better. And then the question they go on to is, and Darren's mentioned this, is, where does it lead to? Well, I have recognition and standard. And those are the things that are important around progression. So my question to the panel is there any evidence that those are the same, the drivers are the same for the kids who are at the bottom of the system? Because we know that actually works. We've had 10 years of making that work at the top of the systems, level 6 and above qualifications. Are those the same drivers as kids at the bottom of the system? I think that's a really important question.
The drivers being, they want to be told by someone. They want to be told by someone who knows what
The drivers are that they basically want to know that what they will do will enable them to progress their lives. So the progression is the key word. They're looking for how this will progress their lives, and part of that progression that they're looking for is the concept of recognition and standing as they progress their lives. And but it's also got to be something they'll enjoy doing. In other words, what would they be doing in 5 years? That's got to be enjoyable. So that's what we see at, the bright kids coming through, the ones who succeeded. So my question is, are we other kids, do they have different drivers, or are they simply those same drivers but they're hidden by the day-to-day realities of the sorts of things that Dale was talking about?
They do have the same drivers, but they're definitely more hidden, and the youngsters are coming from further back. One of the things that's really apparent to me is that there is a subset of young people who are not aspirational around not just careers but life in general. And I think that a lot of youngsters are growing up in homes now where there is nobody that they know close by who is a career person or is a tradesperson or has been an apprentice. So, and in actual fact, they're almost learning that to have aspirations and dreams and high hopes is really to set yourself up for disappointment. So why bother? So, you know, if your sights aren't high enough, I think that's a lot of the work we have to do to rebuild some of the aspirations of young people so that they do aspire to getting on that progressive journey. But I agree, young people relate much better with young people.
I've got some colleagues who are youth advocates and movements, and they've got about 160 youth that they deal with in total, who range from Pākehā, Māori, Pacifica, colour, ethnicities as well. Now I asked them the questions, what do they see in their kids who are, some of them are at risk, and some are just kids who love going together because it's something to do and it's an inspirational space for them to be. And their biggest response to me, these two advisors, were these kids just don't have life skills. They don't have people at home teaching them how to be aspirational in the first place, to then want to be the fireman, want to be the pilot or the astronaut. So life skills is something that a lot of our at-risk farmers are definitely missing, to then enable them to be able to even think about wanting to be that. So, and I concur with Dale, you know, they don't, they definitely want it, it's just accessing it and untapping it is a big issue for us.
Yeah, if I can add to that as well, I managed the Action Weeks programme down in Christchurch, which took an unemployment rate of over 1,000 young people down to 42, and we knew them all by name. But the way we did that was by getting young people to work in groups and work together to establish what they wanted to do. They weren't getting the information at home, a lot of the most at-risk young people, but by working together, they spun off each other and they supported each other as well, and they're very, very keen to do that.
Simon, I'd like to ask about Christchurch. A lot of companies are looking at the lessons from their crisis response and how they can apply that across the country. Often out of crisis comes some interesting new techniques and systems. What's happening in Christchurch to retrain people for the trades needed to rebuild Christchurch, and is there any learnings that the rest of New Zealand could take over?
Yeah, Christchurch has got very focused on trades, and we need in excess of 20,000 people in addition to the current workforce we've got. So trades is an important area, and I might get Jeremy to come in on this as well. What we've got at the moment is quite a fragmented industry, and it isn't particularly connected into the pools of where available labour is. Going back to Graham's systematic sort of failure of the careers sector around there, that's causing us problems in terms of identifying people who can be upskilled and retrained. That said as well, we've also got those other sectors that I talked about before, which are in very good growth mode. The ICT industry, we surveyed 37 of the 250 companies prior to Christmas, so prior to the February quake, but they had 304 vacancies between 37 companies. The earthquakes have just made that situation worse. The businesses are still reporting they need staff, but there's a real disconnect at the moment between getting those staff out of schools, out of universities and into those businesses. Businesses are looking very much at migration as the answer, and that appalls me, because I think we can do better, we should be doing better. We've got 6,000 people unemployed in the city at the moment. Some of those will have transferable skills that we could be moving them into those industries, but just not getting the right information.
I mean, the point that Simon made to me, and so of other people down there, I mean, Canterbury is a tale of two cities, Christchurch is a tale of two cities. The west is still functioning, in fact booming in some areas, and the east is where some of the sort of serious long-term issues are. I guess that, again, the long and the short-term answer of this is that people actually have to stop trying to do each of their own little bit. The ITOs and Christchurch Polytechnic and the other polytechnics in the top half of the South Island, struggling, but we're slowly making progress to actually produce that end-to-end solution whereby people sign into the trades program or pre-trade program and then actually come out and go and do work. And the key thing at the moment, of course, is we don't know when the rebuild's going to start, so we have to actually get them stacked up in the pre-trades, but then we have to have a process of them coming out of that when they're needed, but then continuing into an apprenticeship so that they don't just stop at a particular level. And if we can get that system to work in the Canterbury region, then we want to roll it out nationally.
I think the key here is what the Minister said earlier, it's about matching advice to opportunities. The problem is our information on what future opportunities are going to be is pretty lousy. And we've been doing a lot of work down in Canterbury with the Employment and Skills Board, newly set up function down there, which attempts to coordinate activities. So we've got a few members here from DOL, Jeremy sits on the board as well, trying to piece together that longer term view so that we can translate that advice back to young people or back to people who are outside of the workplace and get them re-engaged into activities that are going to give them a sustainable future.
Two more questions, and then we need to get into the group discussion.
Diana Clark from the Office of Ethnic Affairs. I'd just like to draw the attention of the increasing number of ethnic youth entering the workforce and how that might have an effect on training and engagement with youth. So there is an increasing number of ethnic youth entering the workforce. So I'd just like to draw that attention to everybody.
Could I ask, Diana, when we're talking about ethnic youth, what are we talking about, like migrant minorities or?
Yeah,
and are we talking about diversity and inclusivity?
Absolutely, diversity in the workforce will be increasing, and particularly in young people. They've got great aspirations for education for their children. You know, they come to New Zealand, they have great aspirations for their children in education and in working careers. And I think we've just got to put a little bit of attention to increasing diversity in the workforce and how that will affect.
Any comments from the panel on the question?
I would just reflect, I guess, that diversity is such a wonderful opportunity for inclusivity, for learning, for having another look at yourself, having another look at your family. It's a gift.
Absolutely. And I do see it as a positive.
Yeah.
It just hasn't been mentioned.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I wonder if we're getting to that deficit model thing, which is another thing. Okay.
Paul.
So,
hi, I'm Paul Kennedy from Student Job Search. We're engaging 60 to 100,000 tertiary students or intending or currently every month. And a lot of what I'm hearing today really resonates loudly with Gen Y, etc. But I really want to lay a challenge, I guess, or a question to why I'm here. That, you know, my hypothesis is that tertiary students coming in or intending tertiary students when they're leaving secondary school are making poorly informed decisions. And one of the reasons why that, which you've alluded to many times, is the fact that they don't understand what the future roles will be. And we've got career advisors sitting there with no information on what their careers will be in 4 and 5 years' time. And there's sufficient evidence already to say that the most popular jobs in 4 or 5 years' time don't even exist today. So if we can't get business, who are the most informed and should be driving the profit by dictating what the roles and skills they will need, to come in very, very early, you've got a battle on your hands right from day one. So I lay a challenge to business to tell us what their skills are, and the students just want to lap it up and they want us to tell them, but it's very hard to find that information. And I agree with Jeremy around the frameworks that do make it easier, but I want to lay the challenge with business to tell us what they need. I'm sick of hearing skills gaps and brain drain, and I'm sick of seeing my students through Student Job Search disappear to Australian companies who are doing it every day and using our system to suck our engineers and medical students to Sydney well before they qualify. So I can tell you where our doctors and our engineers are going to end up, because they're spending 4 years in internships in Australian hospitals and engineering firms.
Yeah, I'd agree with some of that and disagree with other bits. The lack of information, I think it's possibly a lack of good information A story I tell very frequently, people probably get bored of it, but I walked into Aranui High School. Aranui is one of our lowest decile schools in Christchurch. I walked into the careers room, and I walked in as somebody that supposedly knows what the environment's like, what different industries in the city are doing, and what the opportunities are. And I've got to say, I walked into that room and was confronted by a wall that would have been probably half the size of the back wall there, and was completely overwhelmed with the amount of pamphlets, the amount of information, and just what it all meant. And this is somebody who's supposed to be an expert looking at this, trying to navigate my way through that. And I stood there stunned, not knowing where to look. Now, if I'm doing that, what chance does a young person have? And I think, your point about businesses connecting is a good one, but we've also got to look at the system of how businesses connect. For a business to connect with the career system in Christchurch, they need to connect with 30 different schools. Now, how practical is that for a business who is trying to make money? And I think what you've identified there is a systematic problem with the system, that it is impossible for businesses to connect across a range of schools. They pick one or two pets and tend to deal with those, but that disadvantages a whole range of kids who might be interested in that particular area. So I think that's something we've got to do an awful lot better and smarter.
And you're probably talking about large businesses there. What about the SMEs who don't have the freeboard available to them?
I don't disagree with some of that, but at the end of the day, I also at risk of being a little confrontational with some. It is a challenging space, but I do think that's a cop-out in many respects as well.